Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast, which is powered by SIG. And I'm Philip Eidson, the host of the show, and I'm joined once again by Jeanette Nyden. So Jeanette is a well-renowned contracts and negotiation specialist. She approaches her work with a focus on building win-win sustainable agreements. And regular listeners to the show will know that I interviewed Jeanette recently. It was back in episode 173, where we discussed the topic of contract negotiation. So if you haven't had the opportunity to listen to that interview, I would really recommend that you go and check that out. But in the time that we had scheduled to chat during that original interview, we actually didn't get to all of my questions. And so I invited Jeanette back onto the pod so that we could have the opportunity to really finish our conversation. And so in today's podcast, we discuss what I wanted to get to but didn't have the chance to last time, and that's the art of a balanced deal. So what is a balanced deal? When do you need one? When don't you need one? And I also ask, what are some of the prerequisites for a balanced deal to even start thinking about negotiating one? And then Jeanette shares her advice for those looking to start the process with one of their suppliers or one of their potential suppliers. And so I started the conversation by asking Jeanette, what are some of the principles of achieving a balanced deal?
The principles come from Getting to We. Mm-hmm. The book that I wrote with David Fringlinger and Kate Vitasek. Yeah. And we called those principles the guiding principles. And what we mean by that is that based on research that we had done, there are 6 guiding principles that really help maintain that balance. So I'm not talking about what the financial model looks like yet. I'm not talking about what the governance model looks like. I'm not talking about what the scope of work looks like. I'm talking about the mindset that's needed for a balanced deal. And there are things like that are obvious, reciprocity and honesty. But we take a different take on honesty, for example, and we talk about having accurate conversations. Yeah. So rather than using anecdotal evidence, we use data, we use customer surveys that are robust, that have good questions, and enough responses that can actually give the buying organization good, solid, reputable data about the supplier's actions or not, rather than trying to come at conversations with anecdotes. We talk about things like loyalty to the partnership. And this is a really big concept in that both partners have to be loyal to the third entity called the relationship. Yeah. If the customer is only loyal to itself and isn't loyal to the supplier, the customer may likely ask for changes in the scope of work or changes in the pricing model that will ultimately disrupt the supplier's ability to perform and to earn a profit. If the supplier is only loyal to itself, then likewise they will also make changes to a scope of work or to the pricing model that'll benefit itself and will not necessarily benefit the customer. So these guiding principles are incredibly important, and they lead into a larger umbrella concept of trust. So trust isn't the guiding principle. Trust is the outcome of living with the guiding principles as the foundation of the relationship.
I just want to touch on the fact that you talked about this third entity, which is obviously a mindset shift, as you referenced, that both parties are seeing the ultimate deal as an entity in of itself, and so they're both working for the benefit of that deal versus working for the benefit of each individually. I wonder if you have, and I'm sure you have, experience of helping people change their mindset to think like that, and if there's any kind of similarities between the journey that people go on to really see a deal as an entity in of itself, of which you're both party to, versus trying to basically get the best outcome for your company, whether you're a buyer or a seller individually.
So the mindset actually starts at the very top. It is actually a top-down. So what I've often found is executive leadership, whatever that might look like in terms of a title, and the day-to-day people who implement these highly strategic relationships are completely on board with the need for collaborative mindset, collaborative behaviors, collaborative practices. The day-to-day people who sit down with their counterpart from the supplier and or the customer understand the value of the collaboration. We need to work together to get these goals accomplished, and I cannot take a position that is so harsh that it harms you, nor can you take a position that's so harsh that it harms me if we're going to get this work done. It's the middle management that I have found is the hardest to sell. The executives are on board because from a strategic perspective, they have a large enough, I want to say, territorial view of the business that they see all the different aspects of the profit and loss statements. They see, for example, real estate, how it is allocated across various departments, how those allocations may be different between one department to the next, whether it's a capital asset or not a capital asset, et cetera. And that territorial view gives executives the ability to rise above an immediate need to, quote unquote, win. It's the middle management that I'm finding are tactical because of the thinning out of middle management. So the companies I tend to work with don't have a lot of middle management, and so they get brought into less strategic kinds of conversations and are more tactical implement kinds of conversations, and they lack the territorial view, and so they're the ones that are typically the most curious and skeptical at the same time about how this is going to help them, because they're not curious about how it impacts anyone else's profit and loss statement. They've only got their profit and loss statement that they need to manage. That's what they're graded on. That's what they're judged on. That's what their 360 performance review is on. And so to talk to them about strategy, it's kind of like, yeah, that's all well and good, but those are not the benchmarks that I'm graded on, and I'm graded on getting my unit to perform, and how is this going to help me get my unit to perform? And as long as we have that mindset, that's a pretty big challenge. The journey is the other part of your question. And what we have found works are, and they're time-consuming and they're expensive in the sense that you're bringing a lot of people together for a day or two, but it's so worth it, is that you bring all three levels together. You bring representatives from the executive leadership, you bring middle management, and you bring some of the leaders that implement the day-to-day kinds of operational things with the suppliers, and you bring the supplier team and the buyer team together. So you can have, I've had 30 in a room, I've had 60 in a room. And you go through the vested process that Kate and Mike Ledyard and Carl Manrove designed in their first book, and you really go through what are the desired outcomes for this relationship. What are the financial incentives? What are the operational incentives? What's the market advantage incentives to truly partnering? Going far beyond a customer-supplier relationship, but a true partnership in the market. That process in and of itself normally alleviates the skepticism, but leaves enough curiosity that people will challenge and poke holes in a very legitimate way into the concepts so that they can become implementable.
Where does the desire to do a deal like this usually come from? Is it a top-down, so it's already, the directive is already from above that this is a different approach we want to take, or do you see that it's at the middle management level that you talked about, so somebody who's already really involved in this supplier relationship, whether it's a buyer, whether it's a stakeholder, maybe it's even a provider who thinks there's a different way of doing things? I'm curious as to what's the usual impetus for a deal like this.
Depends on which side of the table you're sitting on. So I want to start with the provider side. My experience with providers who are capable of being true partners and being able to come in a partnership stance, it is at all levels that they are ready to collaborate. It is at the day-to-day level, it is at their middle management level, the account representative level, and then it would be at the senior executive level who's responsible for a portfolio of similarly situated accounts. And those providers often have two parallel tracks. They have the customers that are very collaboratively oriented and partnership oriented, wherever they are on that scale. Some are more and less, but there's more of a sense of a balanced and fair partnership. And then there are the very traditional customer-supplier relationships. I send this out for RFP, and if they're the lowest performing bidder, you get the work. And so they have their hand in both worlds. They can manage both. And then for the customer, though, it's a very different place. For the customer, it really has been my experience that it needs a very strong executive level champion. And even if there are people at the more day-to-day leadership level who are implementing the deal and being part of the operational aspects of the partnership, even if they're on board, there's very little they can do outside of their day-to-day duties to be able to influence the collaboration. Sort of becomes sort of like an island. Well, my island functions very well. We don't have the problems that Sally's island has or Sam's island has. And by the way, Sally and Sam, I don't know why you're having problems on your island, but please don't come to my island because everything's working just fine. But as soon as Mike leaves his island and gets a promotion or goes to another company, that island may not continue to be as collaborative because it's really driven by Mike's desire, in this example, to want to collaborate. And it skips over middle management, again, because I think that they're so tactically pressured to perform to a measure, whether it's a P&L or some other kinds of measure. And I think that pressure just doesn't provide them with the incentive to want to think beyond their island. I mean, they're actually disincentivized to think beyond their island in some circumstances. Even if they agree, it's still like, well, how is this going to help me? How is this going to benefit me? And then the executive level, because they have the territorial view, they often want to leave. The word that comes to mind is legacy. The couple of people that I've had the privilege of working with really wanted to sort of leave a legacy. Like, I've been in this field for 25 years or 30 years, and I'm going to go and retire from this kind of work and become a consultant or whatever it is the next phase of my life is, and I want to say that I've done something remarkable.
One of the things that you mentioned it a couple of times was how people who are on the day-to-day side of a lot of these deals are not necessarily incentivized to want to bring a balanced deal and to go beyond the traditional metrics. I'm wondering, in your experience, have you seen organizations who have been successful in kind of creating a safe space for their people to have confidence in working differently, or is it just change the metrics? It's as simple as changing the metrics. I wonder what you've seen.
So I've seen change the metrics, and I've seen change the metrics be successful. So I've seen different types of scorecards have a tremendous amount of impact, because instead of measuring something over which the supplier has little control, we're now measuring something the supplier has a tremendous amount of control in. And so those metrics can be very, very successful and very powerful. I have had some conversations with some clients with varying degrees of success of trying to align a supplier account executive metric with their corresponding counterpart at the customer. So whether that would be an executive VP or a director, whatever that title might be, in that they are both incentivized to receive some sort of financial, quote-unquote, bonus based on the performance of the partnership and the scorecard, the joint scorecard. People are very excited about this idea. They're excited that we're going to be aligned, sort of like we're in this together. But moving it through the individual organizations and getting approval, especially in organizations that are heavily regulated and where HR plays a very strong function in making sure that the organization complies with any regulations that they may have with respect to employees. I'm thinking global organizations. That conversation tends to mute and change and dampen the spirit. And it's not wrong. I don't want to throw HR under the bus. That's not my intention at all. I actually recognize the limitations. And so when I have these conversations, I'm very upfront with people and say, there are going to be limitations. Like I'm suggesting a conversation. I'm not suggesting contract language right now, right? Because I'm a contract attorney. So we're not putting this in writing, but let's look at it. Let's design it. What could it possibly look like? What are the hurdles? And it's often that both organizations face hurdles that are not known to them initially. And then some organizations are able to find something, even if it's part of a governance structure as opposed to a bonus, and how they meet, that helps them stay aligned at that executive and middle management level. And some organizations are not as successful and have just completely jettisoned the idea and just said, that's not something that we're able to do.
We're not ready for that yet.
Or we're not able to.
Yeah.
It's not even ready. Are there structural limitations?
That's a good point.
Very legitimate compliance regulations that could prevent this sort of thing from coming into place, and that, in my mind's eye, has to be respected and honored. However, the conversation can still happen. Even if one of the organizations says no, having the conversation's always been beneficial.
Yeah, to explore the potential rather than just make any assumptions. So other circumstances, you mentioned a little bit then around, it's kind of in the exploratory stage, but are the times when a balance deal just isn't possible?
The times when I've seen a balance deal not come about are twofold. One is when one organization cannot align itself internally to be able to perform the vested model. They're not able to get all their stakeholders in alignment around common values. They're not able to use the common principles. They're not able to put in a governance structure that's as robust as needed for a partnership. The pricing model is limited. They're not as flexible in being able to use different kinds of pricing structures, cost plus and fixed fee and time and materials. To create a flexible model, they want a fixed fee for budgetary reasons. And as a result of all those limitations, they're not aligned internally to a balanced deal. The other is when both companies really, really want a balanced deal, and both organizations, the client or customer organization and the supplier organization, have a history of being able to do this, but not necessarily with each other. And we do a compatibility and trust assessment. It's called a CAT. And Getting to We talks at some great length about the compatibility and trust assessment, and we've got some images if people are interested. That 5-point scale is incredibly important to establishing whether there's enough trust, communication, there's enough focus on innovation and what it means to both companies, and that they're aligned in that respect of what innovation means for the balanced deal to come to fruition. If there are large gaps in communication, large gaps in trust, large gaps in team mindset, then there's not going to be enough compatibility. There'll be too much distrust, or the communication will be disjointed, or they have very different definitions of innovation. A supplier might think, we'll completely redesign it and we'll make this widget blink and turn blue, and that'll really upend the market, and won't that be wonderful? And the customer is actually wanting a series of incremental continuous improvements that they've not yet seen so far. And so the super duper widget that blinks and turns blue is not able to be absorbed by the customer team because they're not set up for disruption. And the supplier maybe doesn't have the team in place for a year-over-year continuous improvement because it's more of a 5-mile walk as opposed to a snap with something that's completely different. Yeah. And that takes a dedicated team year over year to do it, and they don't always have that available to them. So those kinds of mindset differences that are cultural can sometimes present themselves as a result of an initial assessment, and then that assessment will help the team of us, people like me, be able to have a really frank but gentle conversation with the companies. Is there really enough compatibility around communication and definitions of innovation, for example, that we can in fact create this balanced deal? And then this leads to another thought, Philip, if I may. A place where I really like to play, if you will, as a business owner, is in this place where companies are not able to 100% commit to a truly vested deal. I know I've had many conversations with Kate Vitasic about her desire to maintain the integrity of what it means to be a vested deal, and that it has the hallmarks of a vested deal. It has all the elements of a vested deal that we outlined in the manual, the vested outsourcing manual, and the 10 elements. And she's absolutely correct. For organizations, though, that can't quite get there, but want better than last year's performance-based deal, there is an opportunity to take a mindset of an organization that is aware of and has done somewhat well with a performance-based deal and take it to a higher level, but it's still not yet vested. And I'm very clear in the work that I do. I do not label those deals vested, but I will bring in a vested concept and start getting people very comfortable with it. So we'll do a more creative pricing model using different kinds of pricing strategies. We will develop a little bit more robust governance structure than what the organizations are currently using or are comfortable with. And if those go well, and if the legal teams are able to embrace these changes without feeling as if they're putting their organizations at risk, then the next step to vested can be a much smoother step. And one organization that I'm working with is in that space. They have a legal team and they have a performance-based agreement with the current provider, but they are not able internally to align themselves on the customer side to get quote-unquote vested. And they've actually been told, we don't want to sign on to vested today because we know we're not ready for it. But what can we do to take it from performance-based to vested, because I want to be vested in the future, just not this round of negotiations with this particular provider. That, to me, is the best possible spot, because it's a deep awareness of where you're at today with a deep desire to want to get to a better place tomorrow.
Yeah, it really helps them iterate, doesn't it? I think it's really important that if you're not ready to go full out in a vested deal, it's not like it's a choice of one or the other. And you can then start learning some of the principles and then perhaps feel more comfortable as part of a journey.
And this leads to the other thing that I think you and I have talked about in the past, and that we're seeing is the change in the workforce. Yeah. So as we're seeing younger people come into the workforce, if they're assigned to contract manage a deal that is performance-based plus some of these wonderful principles that Kate Vitasic and Mike Ledyard and Carl Manroth identified, then they're already indoctrinated that, of course, we have a governance structure. Of course, we have a pricing model that has 3 different ways of pricing 3 different kinds of work. And then if you look at them and say, well, let's do a traditional RFP, it's going to be fixed fee, completely blind, no governance, here are our terms, there's nothing about reporting, there's nothing about meeting, there's no desired outcome for what we would like to accomplish other than you come in and do this work for us. They sort of look at you like you're the one that's crazy. And that's such a marvelous place to be, to have people accept, well, of course we're going to have governance meetings quarterly where we're going to talk about what the future holds and not just talk about what went wrong, because they've already experienced that. And that's the most exciting part for me of why I love this work, is I get to work with people who don't have a lot of baggage and negativity for what went wrong in all those outsourcing deals in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, and so much of that change management has already been done. So the people that you're working with, the mindset has changed. Now they're ready to really make a difference and go the full hog. Everybody has signed up to a balance deal. Everyone has the situation was ripe for a balance deal. The contract was done. I wonder if there's some things that you see on a regular basis that are that lead to the unwinding of a balance deal, if you will. Like some actions that perhaps one party or the other take that go against those principles, but you see it relatively often, that you just kind of wish that that folks had been, maybe they hadn't taken that course of action, or that they'd have considered that more before they actually got into a balance deal with the other partner?
It's always the implementation. Every single time these deals have fallen apart that I'm aware of, where I get the phone call and I come in and investigate, it's always the implementation. There's a very strong deal team that includes sourcing on the procurement side, includes the leadership on the business side of the customer. There's a very strong deal team on the supplier side. They understand how these deals work. They've got an account manager or some other sort of leader that has done this kind of work in the industry before, understands partnership, and they get a very strong and robust agreement negotiated, and then nothing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get handed off to an appropriate project manager or contract manager who's been involved all along, and they get this, and it just looks weird. They don't understand why they have to have all these meetings. They send out a customer satisfaction survey that, and this is for real, 6 people answered a particular question.
Yeah.
And then now you're back to anecdotal evidence instead of robust data, because nobody has told everybody why they have to take this 25-minute semi-annual customer survey, supplier survey, and that it's tied to their bonus.
Yeah.
So they don't answer it, and 6 people do, and those 6 people have a very strong voice, positive or negative, and that whole handing off is just horrendous. And it can be on the supplier side and on the customer side. It doesn't have to be just one. I've seen suppliers where the choice to move the account manager, usually by promotion after these deals are signed, because they're so financially robust, that person gets promoted and they're no longer involved with all the same people, so they cannot provide the oversight on their team. And on the customer side, they hand the contract management to someone in their supplier relationship management team, but that person wasn't part of any of the conversations.
Yeah.
So they really are tentative and don't know how to properly manage it, and they allow the team members at the day-to-day level who really don't understand what the deal is to manage the deal as it was managed before the balanced deal was signed.
Yeah, so it goes back to being, now you have the contractual structure of a balanced deal, but the operational kind of management and governance reverts back to how it always was.
This is an immediate sort of thing. This is something that you'll see within months, and definitely within the first 12 months of what could be a 5 or 7 year deal, including options. And so that's why it's something that I felt so passionately to be able to talk about, is because that's the part that those of us, so I can manage a deal and I negotiate a deal, but that's pretty unusual because those of us that are normally structuring these deals don't manage them. So we're not seeing what happens 6 months or a year later.
Now, and I guess a follow-up question to that, does that strike the death knell for that deal, for that balanced deal, or is there a point of no return? If you capture that before enough damage is done, you can turn things around?
I have not seen, in my own personal practice, things turn around enough.
Right.
What I have seen is that they can stabilize, and at the end of the term, there is some form of unwinding. Either some portion of the business goes to another provider, or they decide to completely restructure the way the work is done, maybe bring some of it back in-house if it's core to the customer's delivery to its own customers. But there's something about it, if that first year, if that implementation is not contract managed appropriately and robustly, it will limp along, sort of like bad roommates, right? You've got the lease, and you sort of figure out who's going to do the dishes, and you're going to sort of deal with the vacuuming and the laundry, but you really don't like hanging out with that person, and you're really not going to go out of your way to invite them out for beers, even if you're going to go out for beers with a similar group of people. Or if you do, you're going to sit at the other end of the table because you got to live with them every day. And I mean, I'm just going back to when I first left school, and you have roommates, and some of them are your best friends for life, and some people you don't really talk to again after you move out. What I have found is that compatibility is critical and that implementation is critical. And it's almost as if you could draw a line, and I say almost as if because I haven't done the research, and I bet Carl Manroth has now done because he wrote the compatibility and trust assessment, is that there's likely an indicator that the more compatible the relationship is in their communication, definition of innovation, team focus, and orientation, that they're more likely to be able to implement it. And if they're not aligned up front, or they're not aware that they're not aligned up front, then they may have a more difficult time implementing it. And without a strong champion, then it's less likely to perform, and that bitterness sort of resonates with people and ultimately undermines the agreement. The ones that I've been involved with, Philip, they ultimately, some portion of it gets unwound to some degree, and it's still formulated. They're still partners, but it's not where they had thought it was when they were negotiating that fair and balanced deal.
When you see balanced deals and organizations who are party to the balanced deals be successful, is this something that those have in common? Yes, there is. And it isn't just the vested deals and the fair and balanced deals, but they're also the performance-based deals that are performing to expectations. So this whole range of deals have a commonality of a negotiation style. And again, this is in Getting to We. There's an entire chapter that we wrote about on this. And Oliver Williamson, who is an economist and worked with other economists and wrote some very seminal works and received a Nobel Prize, identified within transaction economics 3 negotiation styles. Muscular, where a customer and or supplier is more powerful in the market and they take advantage of their counterpart. There's the benign, someone is so weak in the market that they sort of go about their work blindly and they don't raise a lot of red flags, ultimately undermining both parts of the relationship. It's kind of an accommodating / avoiding style. And then the third is what he calls the credible style. And it holds people accountable, and it is wise at the same time. And wise meaning, you've got accurate data. You don't have 6 people taking a customer service survey for a bonus. You have the right people at the table. If a decision maker needs to come and approve a continuous improvement change that a supplier is suggesting at a meeting, what's wise is to have everyone there prepared to be able to make that decision. And then the accountability comes into that. If you've got a governance structure in place or any kind of meeting structure in place, even if you don't call it governance, that requires loyalty to the partnership, requires an equitable distribution of gain share, that requires people to be honest and accurate in their conversations, then the negotiation style demands accountability for people's actions to be aligned with those guiding principles of the relationship. And when the negotiation style is the same from the moment you start to negotiate the deal and it's in its infancy, all the way through the natural termination of the deal, whether it's the end of the term and it's time to renegotiate it or rebid it, or you're just done, whatever the case may be, if that style is consistent, even if people change, the deal will perform because people are bringing a higher level of integrity to the negotiation table, and they'll be less likely for a downward spiral of tit for tat.
I've got to make my numbers at your expense, regardless of whether that's the customer's perspective or the supplier's perspective.
Yeah, it becomes less contingent on the individuals and more ingrained in the way of being, on both sides of the table, I guess.
And less competitive, where you're pitting yourself against each other, and instead you're partnering with each other to solve a business problem.
Yeah.
I mean, oftentimes that zero-sum mentality comes because of a major shift in the market, a downturn in the stock market, a major competitor entering the market, a major consolidation in the market, an inability to cheaply get natural resources for your product. Those things are very real. But if your attitude is zero-sum, muscular, I have the power and you don't, and now I'm going to extract, that will not survive. If you come at this and say, this is our problem to solve, which is the credible negotiation style, our problem to solve, you're going to contribute and I'm going to contribute and we're going to get through this. We may not always like each other, but at the end of the day, we will still have a relationship and a partnership that will produce. That's that negotiation style I need to see. I don't want people, like one lawyer called a conversation that preceded my involvement in a deal as a quote-unquote group hug.
Right.
That's that benign style where everyone's just, everything's going to be fine and patting each other on the back and really avoiding the fact that there's this major market shift that we all need to start preparing for.
Well, Jeanette, I really thank you for joining me again. I know when we talked the first time, I had so many more questions around balanced deals that we just ran out of time. So it's been great to reconnect. And what I'll do is I will include a link to our first conversation in the show notes. Also, I just like one last question. And I know that you mentioned in that first conversation, but if anybody would like to know a little bit more, I'll get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Thank you for your time, Philip. I really appreciate talking with you as well. And the best way to reach me is www.jnyden.com, JNYDEN.com. It's got all the resources, my email, my telephone number, everything that people could potentially want to check me out before giving me a call.
Awesome. Well, I'll include that in the show notes along, let's say, with the details of the last time that we talked. And those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/balanced deals. That's artofprocurement.com/balanced deals. So, Jeanette, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.